alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a returning guest from ages past, Paul. Welcome back.
Hey, how you doing, Tim?
Well, good to have you. I'm doing well. I've had a little bit of a weird day of writing. Started early, took a big break, hit it up later, and knocked some good words out. But anyway, that's not the point, because this is obviously going to be a time capsule of sorts now. Normally, I don't do that kind of writing progress stuff. So, Paul, tell the listeners who may not be familiar with you a little bit about yourself, because it's been like 50 episodes since your last year, almost a whole year.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I'm a author and podcaster of way too many genres. I'm a mutt when it comes to writing, but I'm a one of those writers who's making the switch. I'm moving away from what I just thought I wanted to do for the rest of my life into something I definitely know I want to, a genre that I want to get into for the rest of my life because it's my true love. So never a dull day in my creative life, that's for sure.
So what books do you have out there right now? Your previous works were horror up to this point, right? Horror or thriller, right?
Yeah, horror, thriller / suspense. I always call them thriller, but I think when I started paying attention to reader feedback, I started seeing that they're not really thriller. You know, thriller's a pacing thing, and my pacing isn't necessarily a thriller pacing. So I've grown accustomed and okay with calling them suspense.
Okay, no, that's my bad. I'm not really a connoisseur of that kind of modern fiction, don't know that kind of thing.
Oh, me, trust me, I wrote the damn things and I thought they were thrillers.
Yeah, it's funny. So you got The Scales and Chasing the Demon, and what there's another one, right? Rip.
Yeah, The Scales is the newest release, and then Chasing the Demon is Chasing the Demon and Rip are both adapted scripts from an audio drama that I used to have. I novelized those. And then I've got a horror anthology, 12 Deaths at Christmas, and one nonfiction book about, it's for authors, but it's about, how you could actually find build an audience through podcasting with the ultimate aim of selling more fiction. So, like I said, I'm all over the place, but I'm starting to get into fantasy, which is what I've invested the last year of my life getting ready for. And man, I'm ready to dive headfirst into that. I'm so excited.
Oh, the water's good in here. But I say as I look back at science fiction, even though I love fantasy as well, I can't stop. I can't stop looking around. The grass is always greener. It's one of those things. But yep. I do love fantasy, especially the big books. And but it is, again, grass is always greener. So right. What's your fantasy works in progress currently?
Well, I've got and I had this epiphany last year. I wanted to take a chance and see if I could do rapid release. But I also wanted to do epic, right? I wanted to kind of like walk in your footsteps and take on some of these epic stories, because that's what I love. When I was a younger reader, there was no better, still to this day, there's no better feeling for me than picking up a book you got to hold with two hands, because it's just so thin. And I want that. Before they put me in the ground, I want that with my name on it. But I also knew I was going to do this shift away from horror and suspense / thrillers into fantasy, and I didn't want to have this long void of nothing. One day he's a horror guy. We don't hear from him for a year and a half, and then all of a sudden he's throwing this, 600-700 page epic fantasy out there. So I wanted to make it a friendlier transition, and I wasn't sure how. And I had an idea that had been sitting in my head for, no joke, a couple years. And I thought, that's it. I can write those quickly, and I can get them out. I'll write 4 and publish 4 of them to see if they get traction. And if that's, if that works, hey, I have just made a successful shift into fantasy that's a little more friendly to not only people who are going to find those, but the existing people who have listened to my podcast forever and who, I've tried to prepare for a year that, hey, I'm switching. I'm going to do different things now.
No, that's cool, and that's actually it seems like a good strategy to me. I don't know. Going going back and forth between fantasy and science fiction seems like it could be natural because a lot of those times those are kind of the same genre on some level,
Right. Right.
but they're very different audiences in a lot of cases.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, readers can be fickle, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to surprise anybody. I want, these are wonderful people who, if they like the stuff, even just leaving the reviews for your stuff, that all of that helps. So I didn't want to do a bait and switch. I wasn't going to. I think I'm still traumatized from when I knew Stephen King as a horror writer, and then he switched into things that were far tamer than he'd ever done before, and I wasn't ready for that. I think I'm still scarred by by him doing that, and I didn't want to repeat it for my readers.
Okay, scarred by not being scarred enough by the actual books.
Exactly.
It didn't hit you hard enough with the actual story, so he's like, "Oh, what gives?"
To this day, I don't think I'll ever give Dolores Claiborne another chance.
Okay, fair enough. I've never read that one. I couldn't get through some of the scarier King books, though, honestly. They're just too long was the main thing. I enjoyed it a lot, but I couldn't get all the way through it. Because enormous book.
Stephen King, and he likes to go on these. The thing about fantasy is when fantasy authors go on a side trek, it's usually entertaining. When he and hey, what do I know? He's worth hundreds of millions. But when he goes on a side trek, really, you didn't go anywhere. When you find yourself back home, you realize, wow, we didn't really actually go anywhere.
And then sometimes that character bites the dust. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
At least a lot of the time, that seems like what happens. Anyway, I do like King. I'm not trying to criticize or anything. But and everyone's got their own opinions, of course.
Yes, yeah.
The opinions of pulsating do not represent a live after reading.
Yeah, make sure you put the disclaimer in there.
It's there now. So, so anyway, so what's this series called? This urban fantasy you're looking at?
It's called the Zodiac Series, and it's got the first 4 books will come out between July 1st and October 1st. I've got everything set up and ready for it, and it's been a neat learning curve. I would love to keep going with it, but again, though I do this because I absolutely love telling stories and sharing stories, I also have to eat. So I wasn't going to do more than the first 4 books before I started continuing the series. Obviously, with a name like the Zodiac, no spoiler alert here, there would be 12 books in the series. Maybe
13. No,
ooh, I know,
the
right?
13th one. No, yeah, definitely. It's actually kind of funny. I had this one big fantasy idea that I'm still working on the back burner. It has been for a while. Kind of like add a little to the first book every year, but it's been slow going because it's never really been my focus since I got added the first 50,000 words. But it was basically that had like 12. It had these 12 gods that were a part of the clock face.
Oh, cool!
So there's one per number on the clock face, and I'm like, how am I going to introduce all these suckers in one book? Anyway. And then use them for the rest of the series. That's gonna be tricky because it wasn't like you just run into one. Like there were already 2 in the first book, 2 or 3.
That is a neat idea, though.
Yeah, it got weird. I mean, then there were robotic giants and stuff. It was one of my books, to be sure. So, anyway, so the Zodiac series is what's this one about?
What it is our character is his name's Ezekiel Sunstone, and he's a demon, but he's the only demon in the history of demons to not have magic. So he's an outcast. He's ostracized. The black sheep of the demon species. But it's that lack of ability. That's what we call it in this story world. It's not magic. It's abilities with a capital A. It's his lack of ability that gets him noticed by the rulers of hell. And he gets sent on a bunch of adventures to do Lucifer's work. It's the way I describe it to people who need an anchor is it's kind of what you would imagine the love child of Jim Butcher and Christopher Moore being. It's, tight adventure with I call it stupid humor, but some people understand that term to be different. It's just silly jokes and puns. And so it's lighthearted. It's funny, but it is an action based urban fantasy series, and I love these characters. They're a bunch of fun. You got to root for somebody who's the only one in the history of their species to not have something that everybody else has.
It's true, and actually, and also, once you've written 4 books with a set of characters, you gotta love them. Or you're
You're
in
right. You
trouble.
better.
At this point, it's gonna be like, oh boy, what did I just do for the past however long? How long did it take you to write those books? Because you did them back to back to back, correct?
Yeah. The funny thing is the Zodiac series was always going to happen, but in my horror days, it was going to be a serial killer series. But I mean, you understand, any writer / author will understand this. The story never spoke to me. It never kicked in the door and said, "You will write me." It never did. And I was having this struggle. How the heck do I get out of horror and thriller and get into fantasy? And it was when I started ruminating on that it dropped in my lap. Zodiac, what if? And then you start doing that what if game, and I explored that, and that's how I got to Zeke. I don't call him Ezekiel; that's too formal. But that's how I got to Zeke in his adventures. So I went to a conference with my wife to Denver in summer of 2019. She does competitive line dancing, and so I go with her, and I just sit around the hotel and write. And I thought, you know what? I've just done, I don't remember, I finished a script or something like that, and I thought, we're going on the road. I'm not going to have my dictation stuff with me. I'm not going to have Scrivener with me. I'm just going to have a laptop. Let me just sit down and write. Now, normally I dictate because I like the speed. I like how it keeps me in the story. But for this one, we were there for 5 days or something. I hand jamming it on a laptop, and it just flowed. It was just flowing. And I wrote that one in just over 3 weeks, and the next 3 books were all the same. And this is somebody like me. I've never written a book in a month. I didn't think I'd seen people in other Facebook groups talk about being able to write like that and then rapid release. And I thought, well, there's a certain genre that can do that. But, then I would flip my hand through the air like aloof. But writers of horror and thriller, we cannot possibly write. But then I realized, no, you actually can. So it almost became an addiction, to challenge the self. I did it once. In 3 weeks, I wrote an entire novel. I'm going to see if I can do it with these other ones. And sure enough, even though they got longer, I was still able to knock them out all within a month. So in under 4 months, I wrote the first 4 novels in the series.
That's awesome. That rocks. As you would say, it's epic.
It is epic.
An epic feat, to be sure. And each of these books, are they kind of more episodic, or do they kind of follow in a continued series thing? Are they more serial, that kind of continuing story between them?
This is something I had a discussion with someone who really cares about the series and my writing career. And I as an epic fantasy fan, first and foremost, I grew up on Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, and to be able to love or hate the later books, or the books in the middle, I should say, where it kind of slows down a lot. It was just the fact that he took me on that journey that was so deep, and that defined who I was as a reader and who I wanted to be when I dreamt of being a published author someday. So these books, shall all 12 of them see the light of day, are going to be a long journey. Of course, like all authors, I'm trying to write each where you could pick it up and possibly catch up with where the story's at. But if you want that full experience, you're going to need to start right at the beginning and be able to follow him through. I just like that as a reader myself, right? For me, it makes it richer. So when it comes to my own stuff, that's the kind of journey I want to take other people on.
No, that's a really good point. I've never thought about it quite so explicitly as what I'm now thinking about it. In terms of, should this story? I mean, you seem like you have a clear vision of that kind of thing. The Wheel of Time. It's like that. Yeah. With me, or the Lord of the Rings, which is admittedly one giant book in its own way, but that's basically what we're talking about.
Right.
And I feel like, I mean, like my epic fantasy is actually somewhat more on the episodic side. So it's kind of funny. You write an urban fantasy, it's got the epic fantasy kind of arc to it.
Right.
And I'm working on this epic fantasy where I'm like, well, you can kind of start book 1 or book 2 is fine.
But I think that's neat, though, right? I mean, uh, it's a way for us to put our there's only the whole theory goes. There's only 7 stories that we can tell. Yeah, right.
Yes, but that's some finite number, right?
Right, some very very small finite number. But when we put it like that, it gives. In a way, it's voice too. For you to be able to do an epic fantasy in that form, it lends itself to your voice and what your readers are going to experience. I think that's a neat thing for us to do.
Yeah, I think it's cool to have, the variety is not bad. And I just hope it works. It's one of those like fingers crossed, guys.
Right.
But, as opposed to something like obviously like the Dresden Files, this was more of a episodic, at least to start with. It feels kind of like an episodic series because we just check in with Harry once a year, basically. His worst weekend of each year, how that series starts.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if I'll be so rebellious when I do make that full shift to epic fantasy. I'll probably I think that's just kind of my preference. And to sustain the long game of this, you got to write something that speaks to your heart, and being able to follow those characters, and unless market conditions tell me otherwise and slap me side the head and tell me I have to write standalones, I think I'll probably do that. You've got me on record saying it, so who knows?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get slapped. Let me put it that way. I don't foresee that happening in this regard. I mean, maybe your wife will slap you, but I don't see anybody else. I don't see the market slapping you away from doing a long series. That seems to be where things are headed right now. Yeah. So, especially with, even the movies are doing that kind of thing now. It's crazy.
Aren't they?
Or at least they've done it at this point. Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, this movie's just set you up for the next movie. Granted, that's basically just the biggest franchise currently.
Right.
And they're so big that it seems like it's oppressive at this point.
It really does.
and love them or hate them, but they're there and they're informing a lot of the storytelling of the world right now, which is
absolutely
kind of fascinating in its own way. But anyway, yeah, so it's fascinating to hear about your process as far as the books. Like you did you type all of these Zodiac books or did you dictate some of them?
Oh no, it was just that just that Denver portion of it. Yeah. So when I got home from that, and I had when I had my gear when I got home and I was back in my writing space, emphasis mine to really highlight that I feel I'm completely more productive in a dedicated space to focus and write. When I got back into my element, it was just the books got longer, but the time frame to actually write them stayed the same. So even the last book in the series is nearly 80,000 words long, and I still did it in the same time that it took me to write that first one, just a little over 3 weeks.
Nice.
And again, this is coming from somebody who was convinced. I don't type fast. I can't. I've got. I spent a career at a desk, so it's not that I have carpal tunnel, but it's just wear and tear on my hands. I physically can't type fast anymore nowadays, and so I was convinced there's no way that I can write a book in a month. And sure enough, if you set up that that setting for yourself. With a dedicated space and whatever tools you would need, it actually can be done. I have converted.
Indeed. I was telling you about this before the show, but I actually encountered this kind of a reverse, not a reverse thing. My space has to be very minimalistic, is what my point is. I recently been digging into what my writing space needs to be like, and it turns out the less clutter, the less electronics, especially, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I never thought I would ever write without a keyboard. Now I dictate, so I never have the keyboard in front of me when I write, basically. And I never have a screen in front of me when I'm writing. It's fascinating. Like, I used to think, like, oh, my eyes are going to be dead by the time I'm 40. Like,
right.
they're going to fall right on my head because I'll be staring at the screen for so much. And there's a lot of that still, because editing, I do that. But for the rough draft, I don't look at the screen anymore. I have a voice recorder. It's so much more effective.
Yep.
And I can't even do it in front of a screen. So it becomes, and like, I can't have paper next to me most of the time either, even because I'll just make notes on the paper because anything is easier than enduring the little bit of fear that comes from actually putting words into a voice recorder for some reason. Never mind that I do these podcasts. That's easy. That's a conversation. But when it's just me, it's a completely different story. No, literally.
Metaphorically and literally.
Yeah. Do you have any obstacles that you run into with your writing flow right now?
With the actual creative process, besides just the self-initiated obstacles of taking on home projects, the creative projects, no, it's my biggest obstacle has come in the editing aspect of these books. I believed, and still do, I believe in this series, this story, this world so much that I finally decided I'm going to dive into the developmental editing world. I'd never hired a developmental editor, and I knew what developmental editing was, and I knew what it would do for you and your story. But to be in that hot seat and be on the other end of the fixes, it's the learning curve, right? It's something brand new. So I miscalculated that phase of these 4 books. I didn't realize. I knew it was going to take longer. I purposely, deliberately added that buffer to my publishing schedule, but I still didn't realize how much more it was going to add. And it was just, as a matter of fact, this morning, that I got myself completely back on schedule, and I have a few days to spare because the 3rd book in the series isn't back from my editor yet. So tomorrow when I wake up, I can officially say, hey, I'm ahead of schedule. But there were some long weeks where I wasn't sure. So if people are looking at developmental editing, yes, and yes, it's me. I see things now that I never saw before because of it. But at the same time, maybe not do it with 4 books. Maybe do it with 1, and definitely give yourself that extra bit of time to do it.
Okay, yeah, 4 books, that's a lot to go through that process. Probably pretty expensive too, I imagine.
Oh, incredibly expensive, and mentally, physically draining. So you got to do a lot of self-care, especially we're not talking about prepositions and comma splices. We're talking about this part of your story doesn't make any sense. You didn't.
Yeah.
We're in book 2, and I don't believe this because you never set it up in book 1. So now you've got to go all the way back to book 1 and rework things. And
well, hey, that's a good thing you did all the books then. I mean, you're book 1 and you didn't know about the big gap in book 2 or whatever,
Well, exactly.
If that's an actual example,
It really worked out well.
But
it
taxing,
does. It is taxing, and it requires a lot more communication with an editor than I ever had before, because she picked out something in the 2nd book, and I thought, wow, she's after you are done pouting about it, I realized, wow, she's right. And the beautiful thing, I hope, if it works, the beautiful thing is that she gave me an additional arc I didn't have before. So a world arc for the whole 12-book series that I'm super excited about, because I didn't get her to believe in something that I had done in the 2nd book. And not that I pull the rabbit out of the hat, but I just didn't go far enough. I didn't go far enough to make her believe it. And when she asked me to substantiate it, that's when I, did a little bit of brainstorming, came up with a way I could solve it. And I realized, wow, this is actually a world arc. This is cool. So, I mean, you gotta be ready for the tough grind, but boy, it's a beautiful thing to do. If you make those allowances and you've got that structure to be able to do it, because that will be the significant barrier for 2020 for me, ultimately, unless something horrible happens. But yeah, that adjusting to a developmental edit was the big one. I can't wait to start writing fresh stuff again.
Oh boy, yeah, that's a good point. So you haven't been able to produce a new book this year because you've been handling the developmental editing mostly.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's all this year has been is
Wow. Okay.
getting that out to her, and then I do. I feel a significant number of edits before I send things out. So editing, my self-editing, and then early beta readers, and then editing again, and then getting it out to her. So it's been that's all 2020 has been. And I've got a fantasy trilogy that's right on my heels going, it's tugging the bottom of my
yeah,
shirt.
it wants you. It's like,
Yeah, it wants my
come
attention.
write me. Yeah.
Come play with me. I want to play. And I'm like, I want to too.
I'm locked inside. We're quarantined with this other manuscript. Anyway, yeah. So that's. Oh, wow. I've never done the developmental edit. At least not. I mean, I've had professional edits, but not to that extent. I've not been able to afford that up to this point. But it sounds fascinating. I'm not. It's scary too, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
In a way.
It really.
But it's just like the I forget which tradition it is. I think it's actually Buddhist. It's like, the old self, it's going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
You might as well change into something better rather than changing into something worse. It's that kind of thing. It's like, if you're going to become a different writer, you might as well become a stronger writer.
Exactly.
That's what the developmental edit is like. You're gonna have to kill off that old writer to become a better version of it.
Exactly. And like anything, any growth opportunity, there's gonna be a little bit of discomfort in the best case scenario.
Yeah, maybe even a lot.
Maybe even a lot. Maybe even some pain.
Oh boy. So we are running a little low on time now, Paul. It's been great having you, but I want to ask you one more question, and it's pretty simple. It's kind of the recurring question. It's have you had a chance to read lately, or other than your own work, of course, which you've been editing?
Yes. Yeah, actually, I have. I've audiobooks. I tell you what, I'm becoming an addict. I really am.
Mm.
It's not healthy. I literally will find projects to do around the house so I can listen to more books. But I did try to read a fantasy book that a lot of people talk about, but I just found it so dry and slow that it was a slug to get through about 200 pages of it. But then, so I did what I normally do in those times. I reminded myself that life is short, and if you're not enjoying what you're reading, go find another book, because there's a million books out there. So that's what I did. I went back and I picked up another Jim Butcher book, because I just love him.
Jim Butcher addict over there. Yeah.
Yep, definitely. And the audiobooks are great because you can get 30, 40 hours of fantasy no matter what you're doing. Mowing the lawn, walking, washing dishes, it doesn't matter. So
that sounds so crazy to me. Listening to a book for 40 hours. I'm not an audiobook guy. I like reading, but I'm also a very distractible reader. But audiobooks, I get lost in them because I'm like, oh, I missed a step. Yeah. Now I have to go back.
And I think a lot of that goes to the narrator. Like Terry Mancour has Spellmonger, and I got it a couple months ago, and it's been sitting in the queue as I listen to other things. And I started a week and a half ago ish, and I finished it like 3 or 4 days ago. So a massive fantasy book, and it's because the story is great and the character's funny, but the narrator just sucks you in. It's not like he does all the unique character voices or anything like that. It's not an ensemble cast. It's one narrator. But, I think sometimes with really strong narrators, they can overcome a lot of the challenges of, focus on an audiobook. Because there have been a lot of audiobooks I've done exactly what you were talking about. You miss a whole chapter sometimes. You're like, wait, what?
That's an interesting point. I never considered that it could be the narrator. I thought it was just me. I was like, I'm doing something else and I lose track, and I'm not getting back into it.
John Lee. His name is John Lee.
The narrator for that book? Okay.
For Spellmonger, yep. And it was just, he's just an amazing narrator and really pulls you in.
Well, that's a pretty strong recommendation. Now. Yeah, pretty strong recommendation, especially getting through the book in a week and a half or whatever.
Yeah. I couldn't stop listening. I really couldn't. It was just it was such a fun. Now, again, in context for people who are maybe thinking about it, just remember, I like stuff like Christopher Moore and Jim Butcher. I like those snarky, wisecracking, not so serious characters. So this book and the narrator's performance, fell in line with that. So if that's not your type of character that you really resonates with you, you might not fall into it like me. But if you do like those characters, yeah, definitely.
Yes, indeed. Well, thanks for being on the show, Paul. Where can people find you and your work on the internet?
If they just head over to paulsating.com, paulsating.com, they can find everything about me over there, Instagram, Twitter, all those good places. I've got it all linked over there.
Wonderful. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. It was great getting a chance to talk to you again.
It's always fun, and don't be a stranger. As for the rest of this podcast, you can find more episodes at mentalstellarpublications.com, and you can find my books at amazon.com. Currently, we're pretty much all exclusive. That includes 10 Liars, which is a big old epic fantasy with firearms. Origin of Storms, which is a giant science fiction book with a little hint of romance. Well, actually, a very, very hint of romance in it. A little bit of romantic space opera there, but also an epic adventure. And then we have Demon Scroll, which is an epic fantasy which features demons and people using scrolls to turn into demons. Thanks for listening, everybody. And talk to you next week.